Welcome to the Iyengar Yoga podcast, bringing you the stories of many people who in various ways are attempting to walk the path of yoga. Our intention is to inspire your own practice and commitment to yoga beyond the mat and in all areas of life. We consider this an offering, a service to the community and labour of love. If you feel inclined, any donations are appreciated. Just visit our page and click the donate button at www.keenonyoga.co.uk/podcast. I hope you enjoy the show. Today's guest on the Iyengar Yoga podcast is Mark Robberds. Mark started practicing in 1997 with Eileen Hall and Peter Sanson in Sydney. Travelled in 1999 to Mysore and has returned there for many visits. He was certified to teach the method in 2010. In 2015, he began other movement practices, studying with the greats such as Ido Portal and Yuan Ayalon, and has now notched up 150k followers on Instagram for his formidable arm balancing skills. He teaches workshops worldwide, currently residing in India, where he's the proud father of a baby girl along with his wife Deepika Mehta. Welcome, Mark, to the Iyengar Yoga podcast. Can you just tell us how you started yoga practice? A little bit about yourself.
Well, you want the long story or the short story?
The short one today.
The short one today, okay, yeah. I guess people have heard the long story before.
Yeah, we've heard the long one, yeah. How did you start yoga and then how did you get into Ashtanga? Just a little bit of a background.
Okay, so I went to my first yoga class with my mum. That was in 97 at a little yoga studio in Sydney, with my first teacher, George Chong. And I think it was just me and my mum were the only people in the class. Had no idea what kind of style it was, but I later figured out it was, you could say, maybe a mix of Iyengar and Ashtanga. And I believe he may have been practicing a little bit with Simon from Yoga Synergy, Simon Borg-Olivier. So it was a kind of a mix, a little bit of Vinyasa, a little bit of Iyengar style, as it was in those days, right? That was pretty much, that were the options. Yeah. And then, I remember just getting hooked from that first class, particularly, that feeling after Shavasana and then going down onto the street and then walking out and just feeling like I was floating. I mean, I've heard so many other people say that same thing, that feeling of Shavasana early on, when you start practicing yoga, it's really...
When you're still allowed to call it Shavasana.
Oh, yeah.
Not take rest.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, yeah. When I was taking rest.
Yeah, when you were taking rest, you had an out-of-body experience, yeah. All right, so and then your mum carried on with the Ashtanga, or you left her at the class? And how did you get into
enough, my mum actually got into Ashtanga through me later. When I started teaching Ashtanga, she used to come to my classes. So I got into Ashtanga properly. Well, not properly. It was I was living in Cairns and I was practicing with these Iyengar teachers there, Nicky Knoff and James Bryant. They were very senior Iyengar teachers back in those days. And they were the ones, they also were teaching Iyengar, but they had a Mysore style self-practice thing going as well. And they were the ones who got me into Ashtanga and, told me about Pattabhi Jois and told me, to go to India. I think I've told this story before, but for those who haven't heard it, I was like, I asked them, I said to them, I want to go to India and learn from a master. Where should I go? Where can I go? And they said, well, the two main options are you could go to BKS Iyengar, but there's a 3-year waiting list, or you could go to Pattabhi Jois. And they said, if you don't mind a little bit of pain, I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, so I laughed at it at the time and said, yeah, sure, I don't mind some pain. So I booked my trip basically. In my mind, I was like, okay, I'm going to go there. That was in 98. In 99 was when I finally went to Mysore. They also told me about Eileen Hall in Sydney.
And you had Eileen training before you went to Mysore?
Yeah, exactly. So I was with Eileen at Yoga Moves, and, in those days, Yoga Moves was kind of like the hub of Ashtanga in Australia, I'd say. Mathew used to teach there, Peter Sanson, a lot of great teachers, Yeah.
And then when you went to Mysore, obviously you learned the practice like most of us did, not everyone, right? Like some people learn it literally. They think, well, I fancy doing Ashtanga, and they kind of go straight to Mysore, which I always kind of feel is pretty brave and kind of crazy at the same time. But most people learn it outside the country and then come to, the source, as it were. And what was the discrepancy? What differences did you find when the Mysore practice and what you'd learnt with Eileen back in Australia, Sydney?
So I actually, if my memory is correct, I got the final pose, Setu Bandhasana. I think Eddie actually taught me that, because I went to India via New York. I wanted to visit some friends along the way. So I stopped in at New York and I went to Eddie's studio. And I mean, he probably wouldn't remember, it was a long time ago now, but that I believe he showed me Setu Bandhasana, and then I went to Mysore. So I had completed, but I hadn't done drop backs. So I learned drop backs in Mysore, and that was a scary experience. I remember one day, Sridhar Guruji used to sit in those chairs at the back. This is in the Lakshmi Puram Shala, right? And just like standing there waiting for them to come and help me do the drop backs, and neither of them came. And then Sridhar just looked at me and said, you do. And I remember just landing on my head a few times, but I learned it, by trial and error.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit like that. That's probably one of the big differences between learning in the West and learning in India.
A little bit more spoon-fed in the West, as it were.
Yeah, I guess so.
More teaching in a way. I kind of always thought, you're going to go to India, people say, well, you must get so much teaching when you go to Mysore. And you're like, well, kind of, in a way, but not the teaching you imagine, right? Like, it's not like kind of, it's, like a workshop,
But maybe by the time I got there, it was already, I think the teaching methodology had shifted, right? Because if you listen to the old stories of David Williams and all those guys, like they would just get adjusted like pretty much in every posture. And I've seen videos of that where Pattabhi Jois is just adjusting everybody, almost carrying him through the practice. By the time I got there, it had gone to this, like if you can't do the pose, you have to stop there. That had shifted, that teaching methodology, and far less adjustments. I mean, there was still a lot of adjustments compared to what happened in Gokulam.
Yeah.
But less than what was going on in the earlier days.
Yeah, I suppose they just kind of, when we talk about adjustments, it was generally kind of putting you in the posture, right? Not like telling you or showing you how to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas Eileen, maybe
I have had that. I remember once in where was it? Oh yeah, Purple Valley, when Pattabhi Jois had just died. Sharat was doing a workshop at Purple Valley. This was in 2009, and
I was there.
You were there, were you?
So I mean, it wasn't. It couldn't have been 2000. It must have been 2007 or 8, right? Like that was when
it was the New Year's Eve 2008 going into 2009.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was the end of 2008 going into 2009.
Yeah.
And so I remember like I would be one of the last people to practice, and so Sharat would just be waiting for me, just sitting, waiting. And, I was learning the third series arm balances at the time. And so I would sometimes ask him to show me how to do it, and he would demonstrate it for me. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Actually, when I first learned Mula Bandhasana, he demonstrated that for me, which is pretty crazy. Like he was just cold and just went straight into it. But I mean, he's got those hips for that.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, I once demonstrated Vrinshyasana A to someone, and I couldn't walk for 2 weeks cold after that.
Yeah. Not a good one to do cold.
So Mula Bandhasana, certainly not hardly warm. Right, so let's have a look. So what were your experiences of Mysore in the early days, as opposed to, let's contextualize this. When you got there at that time, obviously you're in Lakshmi Puram, so there was a big difference in terms of numbers. Teaching methodology had already swung to a less hands-on, more kind of circumspect way of teaching. And how did you see the shift so from more recently, when you've, I don't know when you last went to Mysore. Have you been to the new place or?
I haven't been to the new Shala. I've been, the last practice was in Gokulam.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah. I can't comment on how that is now. But there were big differences between Lakshmipuram and Gokulam. Yeah.
And the way you feel the practice, do you feel the practice the same or remain the same for you, or did it change in those years between your start and?
I was pretty new to the whole thing, right? So even when I got to Lakshmipuram, I was right at the tail end of that era, and I was at the beginning of my own practice. So, I think when everything shifted to Gokulam, there was definitely a sense of excitement as well. Like people were pretty excited about it. And, still in those days, even when it moved to Gokulam, you could still pretty much just turn up for still quite a few years, right? If you remember, you'd write your letter. It's like that was the system at Lakshmipuram. Like you'd have to write your letter. You never got a response, but you'd just go and you'd turn up, and then you would, pay your money and you'd stay for however long you wanted. And so even in Gokulam, it was still like that until probably I'd say when it became like maybe the last few years there was when it changed, 2015 or something, when this online booking thing had started. So there was like that, there was still not the explosion, let's say. Like when things moved to Gokulam, there hadn't been this global explosion of Ashtanga, particularly, the Chinese market, the Koreans, and so on. And there was that first wave of Japanese students with Ken Harakuma. He had brought, the first lot of Japanese students, but the Chinese and Koreans hadn't come yet.
No, I remember at that Purple Valley, I think I said to Shrat, can I come to Mysore? And he said, oh, yeah, all right, just come, you're going to have to start a bit later. But, there was just a verbal, come.
Yeah. It was like very relaxed, huh? Yeah.
Right. So, and more recently, having done more of the training and the gymnastic style of stuff, how do you equate that to your Mysore practice? And is it related, or has it made you think differently about your Mysore? I kind of want to encourage a conversation around, a lot of the more recent stuff that you're doing in terms of the hand balancing, which is very exciting for a lot of people,
Man, I feel like I've gone down a rabbit hole in the last few years with a lot of different things, first of all, there was like me getting taken off the list a couple of times.
Why were you taken off the list? I haven't really come to that conversation.
That was because I was, there was rumors, Sharadi got wind that I had been like teaching different stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So, in my workshops, I was starting to incorporate different things into my workshops, like locomotion, like these animal type movements and, all this kind of stuff, and handstands and backbend workshops and this kind of stuff. So that was like the first sort of, like time that I realized, if I don't toe the party line, then, I'm going to be out of the system.
And it wasn't you went to him, did you, in the office and he put you back on?
Yeah, well, first I wrote to Usha and then we cleared it all up. And then the second time we actually went to Mysore and we had a chat. And,
how'd that go?
It was good, actually. It's always better to speak in person. I just said to him, look, this is my passion. I love doing this stuff, and he was cool with it. So
he changed his mind, or he just understood? Right.
Yeah, he kind of understood where I was coming from, I guess.
Right. Huh.
Yeah. So that was that. And then also, you had like end of 2017 with Karen Rain, and then the whole, Matthew Remete thing. And then just, all that seems to have died down now. But that was a big thing for a couple of years there. And that was, it made me question a lot. Even my teaching methodology, it's made me really rethink a lot of the stuff that I was doing in terms of like the teacher having all the authority and trying to realize, okay, no, maybe this is not the right way. We need to start, giving the power back to the students. So then, of course, that was challenging in the sense of, because like a lead class, for example, basically you're telling the students exactly what to do, when to breathe, when to move, where to step, how to do everything, as opposed to a Mysore style practice where people are able to move in their own pace. Maybe they take a few extra breaths here and there, or, maybe they modify poses or skip a few poses or whatever. So that's kind of like in my teaching, I've been trying to just assess, where how I feel about the whole system in that regard.
Right. Is Sharat still a teacher? And
Deepika and I talk about going back to Mysore for sure.
Right.
I'd like to. I still enjoy the practice, and it'd be cool to just go there and and see how it all feels. And Mysore, the town itself, is such a special place in India. Like it's one of those last little gems in India almost. Like India is becoming so it's changing so rapidly, but Mysore seems to have been able to keep its charm. So we'll see. I don't know, like with this COVID situation, who knows what's going to happen with the whole Mysore scenario and start teaching. And I think we just don't know, right? It's all a big guess. But so getting back to your question. So with the teaching, I'd say like the main thing, I've been thinking this way for many years already, like more of this Krishnamacharya style of, teaching the student individually.
Yeah.
But within the group setting. So, we call it Mysore style or call it self-practice. And I've had that happen. Like I have one of my students is she's a dancer, and she's, got a great practice, but the Ashtanga sequencing just doesn't work for her. So she will come to my workshops or intensives and she just does her own practice, and I'll just help her in some postures if she needs that, So that's kind of like, I feel like a good direction for the future. But at the same time, that only works for someone who's got that awareness of how to practice like that. The structure of the beauty of the Ashtanga sequencing is the structure, and that kind of gives a container. So it's kind of like that's a good place to start, and then people can start to adapt the practice to their own individual needs as they get more experience and as they get older. Where that line is, I don't know exactly. Still trying to figure that out.
Are you still practicing the sequences as they originally were put together?
Myself, not much. This morning, man, it's just like I woke up, I was starting to get a little, groove on, and then my daughter woke up, so then it was time to play with her, and then she has we're trying to get her into a sleep cycle. So like after about an hour, it was like, okay, I can sense that she's going to get sleepy soon. So I took her for a walk, and so then I was walking with her for like 45 minutes. She came back, she fell asleep, and then, then I was trying to get something done. I got a little bit of practice in, a few handstands, and then it was dad duties again. So it's not really the time now for me to, like, it just doesn't, I could if I was really motivated to have that sequence and everything, but I kind of been there, done that, so it's not like a major priority at the moment.
So I was going to ask you about the fatherhood thing, and obviously you've become a recent father. I mean, is it different? Has it changed anything in terms of your view of what you're doing in yoga, or, given you any context or perspective on it? Or has it just kind of made you have less time for training?
Definitely the time issue is there. And then, just you kind of weigh up, like looking at this incredible like being with all this like fascination and joy or whatever, and then kind of like, do I want to just play with her, or do I want to stick my leg behind my head? It's like the option is always like, oh man, I'd rather just be with her and sort of just not miss the moment.
So what kind of amounts of training, like in terms of time, or how many hours were you doing a day before and how much do you do now? I'm sure people will be interested to know how much they need to train to be able to do your one-arm handstand.
I probably before even when I was doing full Ashtanga, like the last time I was in Mysore, that was a 3-hour practice.
And then you were doing training outside that as well?
And then I was doing a bit of training outside that. And then 2018, I started starting to focus more on hand balancing and learning some other things. So I was still maintaining my practice, but not doing those super long practices anymore. So now, before the baby came, probably, let's say 2 hours in the morning and then maybe an hour in the afternoon, something like that, depending on whether I was teaching or not. Because the way I've been working for the last few years was I'd say I call myself semi-retired. So I'd do like month-long intensives, 3 or 4 of those a year. And then I pretty much wouldn't be working the rest of the year.
Right.
Except for a few workshops.
Right.
Yeah. That's right, But when those intensives are on, it's pretty hard to do anything else except teach.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean, I'd get up early and do a practice. I'd do the 4 a.m., 5 o'clock, 4 a.m. wake up and practice. But
and you'd still be doing Ashtanga sequences then?
Yeah. When I'm teaching those intensives, I feel like it's good to keep the Ashtanga sequencing up, just stay connected to it.
What started you on the path away from the traditional sequences?
I'd always had, like, on my radar was always like this attraction to things like capoeira, acrobatics and that kind of stuff. I've been surfing and doing the practice going alongside each other for many years, but I'd never really tried all these other things. And then I think I just got to a point when I was, I guess, 40. What was I? I just turned 40 or whatever. And then I got introduced to Ido Portal, and then it just kind of like, oh, if I want to have a go at this other stuff, like, now's the time, because I'm 40, getting on a little bit. So this next decade could be my only shot at kind of learning some of these other movements. I'm not saying you can't do it in your 50s, but I think if better.
Fair enough. I would say you're probably right there. Yeah.
The younger you are, learning stuff.
Yeah, you're going to be a bit tough, aren't you? It seems what I'm just kind of interested in, I heard you say a few times, is that, and I had it as well, is this diving into the asana and kind of, I want to say, lumping it in with the rest of the philosophical interest that we have in spirituality, and I know your background in meditation as well, right? And kind of somehow lumping that in with the asana. And at a certain point, and I think it sounds like from what you've written, you have the same kind of feeling that the asana was somehow a magic sequence of moves, right?
Mm.
And at a certain point, do you feel that you've changed your relationship to that magic sequence, and now maybe you've got meditation and you've got movement, and you don't have to necessarily put them together so much, or
that's kind of exactly how I'm feeling right now. Like that, the asana sequence and everything was part of that whole spiritual path, but now it's like I feel I've been waiting to use this line. See, my mom, right? She's a Catholic, and she's very much very devoted to God and to Jesus and so on. But she has a little bit problematic relationship with the institution of the church. Okay, she doesn't necessarily believe in everything that the institution says. So one of her mentors once said to her, look, the job of religion is to lead you to God, once you've found God, you don't need the religion anymore. And so you can use that in the same respect to like the asana practice or the Ashtanga method, the methodology. For me, it's like, okay, that it had that purpose of leading me to, I don't want to say God, but to my center, to my true north, or to myself, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Now I feel like I found that. It's like I don't need that anymore. Does that make sense?
Could you have just done it through just the Ido Portal? I mean, I went the same route, probably at a similar time to you, kind of looking more at Ido and then Yuval, and but could you have would you have done that if you'd gone straight to that? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think it produced the same.
I don't think so. No.
Yeah,
I don't think so, because the thing about yoga is that, and like Ashtanga, is that it's part of a tradition. It has all these, the yamas and niyamas. It has the sutras. It has the Bhagavad Gita. It has all the philosophical context, which you're learning all the way, right? So even though you're diving into this physical practice, you're always, if you're reading and you have good teachers and so on, they're always pointing you towards this idea of self-transcendence or liberation or whatever you want to call it. Whereas, within the movement culture, there are definitely, lessons to be learned there, but it's not within that framework of this, this ancient tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, maybe you would find it that way. I'm not sure. But that being said, then it's always the reality check always, isn't it? It's like sometimes some of the nicest, sweetest, most humble yogic people that I meet have never done a yoga class in their life.
Well, have you listened to the Yuval podcast that we did, right?
Yuval, exactly. He's a yogi all through and through.
I tried to, he wouldn't admit he was, but, he really, he does kind of have that kind of feeling without kind of making... sometimes I kind of feel that the asana and the philosophy have kind of been lumped together, and I mean...
Totally. And that becomes problematic.
Yeah. Do they inherently have any relation? I mean, you're still doing a meditation and this kind of thing, right?
Yeah, so the meditation's still there, the pranayama's still there. And that, for me, that's what really gets me centered, The asana still is there. But
your hand balancing any more or less related to the meditation side? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you find one more kind of coercive or cohesive with the other?
I think the handstand is a little bit, it is there. You have to really be present.
Yeah, that's what
you have to really have to be so concentrated to balance so that element is there. And recently, even today, I was actually when I was doing one of my longer holds, I was trying to bring in some like breath counting. So I was breathing in for 4, out for 6, and just maintaining that. So actually just the thought just arose, like in the 5th series of Ashtanga, one arm handstand is one of the postures.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if you ever saw Sharat posted that on Instagram. He took it down, but
just don't do it to the wall. But.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But so there it is. And funnily enough, a lot of the 5th series has a lot of what is considered hand balancing, like it has Pungu Mayurasana, the one arm Mayurasana, and then it has also the 7 position.
I think you amped because you're doing it on a kind of concrete table there, right? Oh. So you're on a table, balancing on a high table made of looks like concrete, and you're trying to do this arm balance. I mean, that's gonna you're definitely gonna want to be concentrated for that.
100%. Yeah, man. So it's all there. But I was listening to your Leslie Kaminoff podcast yesterday, and he mentioned that Krishnamacharya or maybe Desikachar was saying, unless you're able to control your breathing, then it's not yoga, it's exercise. He was not saying that's good or bad, but he was just saying that's the difference.
Right.
So then if we take that as the definition, then, like, we can't just say, oh yeah, this person is a yogi just because they're a nice person, because they might be doing CrossFit. They might be doing CrossFit and be a nice person. And we could say they're a yogi, but the exercise that they're doing might not come into the category of yogic, practice.
So is that your your feeling of being a yogi? It would, without putting words into your mouth, it surrounded a kind of world? Obviously we have the idea of the practically speaking, well-adjusted, nice person, reasonable human being in the world, and then the kind of aims of yoga as contextualized in the Gita or the sutras, which are kind of transcendental, right?
Yeah.
What are your feelings on that?
I'd say, I wouldn't call myself a yogi if you're thinking from a technical point of view, because like the yogis are doing very extreme practices, like those hatha yoga practices like Vajroli and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then Krishnamacharya, on his 100th birthday, didn't he stop his heart or something like that, wasn't it? Did you hear that? Did you read that?
I don't know that story, but yeah, like, I'm nowhere near in that league.
Not doing that yet, right?
Yeah. So, so I don't know, man. That's that whole debate about what is and what's not a yogi. It's a difficult one. I like what David Williams said in your in the podcast you had with him. Was it with? Oh no, it was not with you. It was another podcast.
I tried to get him, and Nathan got him in the end.
Nathan, that's right. It was Nathan's one. Yeah. So he said, what did he say? Like, like Shiva doesn't judge. Shiva's the only one who knows whether someone's a yogi or not. So therefore, I don't judge anybody, and hopefully nobody's judging me. I thought that was a cool way to put it.
He's always got some great one-liners.
Yeah.
I was really sad. He wanted to get me to buy his book. He's done this book called Yoga Detective. So as his main.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you should get it. Yeah, it's quite expensive and it's very heavy as well. It's a big book.
Oh, that's
yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's his book. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. It's going to cost me like $100 to ship it over or something each one. So.
Oh my God. Okay.
I demurred on that front, So what do you think? Are you still interested in yoga as a transcendental? I think, I think from the sound of you, from your early years, you had this kind of, and talking about being young and being scared of death, right? That struck me in your last podcast you did, and I had the same feeling, and that feeling, what is it then after this, after this life, like such a short period of time, do you still have that interest or that yearning towards something outside the body, because what you're doing now seems, at least on face value, so embodied,
Yeah, man. That spiritual longing, if you want to call it that sparked by that fear of death that I had since I was like 3 or 4 years old. And then just questioning why we're here, what's our purpose. That was very strong within me, all through my teens, 20s and 30s. But now it's not, I guess it's just subsided for a while. And, especially with the birth of my daughter, it's like interesting just to watch like what's going on in terms of my perception now. It's like maybe that was the purpose of my life, it was to procreate, to bring another being into this world. But then I still have the same thoughts about her as well. I think, gosh, even soon she's going to have that realization. And then she's going to have to go through the whole of life, dealing with that, the unknown of death and the fear of death. For now, all that kind of stuff, I guess, is on hold. It's coming to more of the practicalities of being a householder. Interesting, because I always, I'd go to Mysore and I'd hear all these teachings, these Indian teachings about the 4 stages of life, of being the brahmachari, the student, then being the householder, and then being the renunciant for the last 2 stages or whatever it is. And then I always think, oh shit, I've got it back to front. Like I kind of felt like I'd already wanted to renounce the world and just wanted to be, you know, traveling and be free of all material possessions and all that kind of stuff, and not be a householder at all. And then, you know, now I'm a householder. So it's kind of interesting.
Why did you change? What changed your opinions? You know.
Well, I mean, having a baby was a big thing.
What made you decide you wanted to go into the world after feeling like in your younger years? I think you sold all your possessions, you said, and moved from Sydney and just, you know, gave up the possibility of opening that studio or you know, running that studio there, right? And decided just to go on the road. What changed in your mentality to facilitate that switch of mindset? Eh?
I think at a certain point towards my late 30s, I realized that, you know, because Deepika and I had been in a relationship for a while, but it was kind of on and off. And then I think both of us at least realized, you know, in order to grow, we really needed to commit. And that was where the growth was. Whereas before, like in my 20s and 30s, the growth was to be out and traveling and to have lots of experiences. But then I'd been doing that for a while, and I felt like, you know, it was becoming a bit dull. You know, the sheen had worn off. So then it was like, okay, now actually the growth is in being committed in a relationship. And then, of course, that just led towards, okay, well, if we're going to be in a relationship, we need a house. We need to live somewhere. So then we bought the house, and then then she got pregnant, and then suddenly we've got the house and the kid. Now we just need the dog, which is going to come when we get back to Bali. Yeah, we get a puppy once we get back to Bali. And so it's been interesting, and it's been, you know, as they say, relationships is where the real growth happens.
I think I remember you posting on Facebook a kind of controversial post. We've done a few controversial posts, I think, right? But one of them was like, was it people kind of, because you were early on, you know, the social media front for the, you know, the visuals of yoga, right? Fairly early on, right? And, you know, I guess I didn't enter into that sphere because there was prejudice, right? Like people, you know, back in the time we were in Mysore, right? Like people, you know, it wasn't like a cool thing to do to put yourself out there doing an asana.
Not at all.
Right? That really, you know, that didn't fly with our peers, right? And there was a lot of censoriousness around this. You know, even having a website advertising yourself as a yoga teacher kind of wasn't really a cool thing to do, right? Like, you know,
totally.
you can maybe use a page or, you know, an email address or something on the page, right? But no, so you got a lot of shit, you know, for putting yourself out there like that, right? In the yoga postures, and, you know, and I remember you writing this post saying, well, you know, like, why shouldn't I have, you know, be able to make a living, have a family, you know, have a house, you know, having devoted myself and all my life to training in yoga, right? I mean, so
that's right. I mean, basically in my 30s, I had no money.
Right.
I was just traveling and doing, you know, teaching here and there, covering other people's Mysore programs. Basically, I would just have enough money to save up to go back to Mysore or to go to Bali to go surf or whatever. So it was around 2013 or something. 2012, 2013, I was like, you know, I really should start trying to make some money. And that's when I started doing the workshops, traveling and teaching weekend workshops. But then, you know, what I realized was unless you have some exposure, unless people know who you are, it's difficult to get people to turn up to these workshops. I mean, if you have a good host, that can help a lot. If the person hosting you is able to really market it for you, and that's fantastic. But, you know, like then with social media, it's just like, okay, here's an opportunity to kind of, you know, put yourself out there. And it was a combination of that, and also just I like writing, you know, so it was a way to self-publish in a sense. And instead of needing a publisher, I could just whatever thoughts or whatever I could just share with people. And it's been a really great medium for that. And unfortunately, people don't read the posts unless the image grabs their attention.
Oftentimes, I think even you could put like you could put an image, like, and the actual text is kind of contradicting the image, like.
Yeah.
Right.
But as long as you get their attention.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Me doing a back bend, grabbing my ankles, and then a post about how maybe that's not such a sensible thing to do all the time. But it doesn't matter if it's,
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, Deepika told you better make some money, or you're not married.
Shh.
I know how it goes.
You said it, not me. You said it, not me.
I know. So, how do you square that with with making money in yoga teaching? I mean, is there any discrepancy in your mind? Because a lot of people still have the old-fashioned idea that yoga isn't a business. We shouldn't be making money out of this.
Yeah, I mean, don't want to be greedy, but I think definitely you should make money if you've got something to share and it has a value and enough people like it. There's nothing wrong with making some money off of it.
And what do you teach in the workshops apart from just asana? Are you trying to convey? I mean, you've done a lot of spiritual study, which I didn't realize having read your bio recently. What are you trying to teach any of that within the asana, or is it just the technical asana stuff?
Yeah, so I'm not one of those teachers who's able to weave in, little philosophical things. Like I'm like Richard Freeman, for example.
Yeah.
I can't like weave in the philosophy whilst the class is going on. So if I'm teaching asana workshops, I tend to keep it, more, I guess, biomechanical. But then I would have a separate section where I would teach philosophy and that kind of stuff, or meditation or pranayama or whatever. So just I'd keep them separate. But then, with this whole, after the whole Me Too thing, this Pattabhi Jois scandal and everything, what it made me realize is that also like this idea of scope of practice. And this, because my idea had been, the yoga teacher myself has to know everything, right? Has to know anatomy, has to know Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutras, the Upanishads, has to know the series, has to know all the vinyasa and everything, has to know all the adjustments. But then with all the gurus falling, then I realized, and then this idea of scope of practice, it's made me realize actually that's probably the reason why we've had so much trouble, is because people have had this expectation that the yoga teacher is all-knowing and put them up on a pedestal. So what I did on my last intensive was I brought in a philosophy teacher, Seth Powell from Yogic Studies. And, he's an expert in his field. And that worked really well, to have that a specialist talking about the subject. So probably in the future, I'll continue to do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think now also the opportunities are great with the online classes that you could do that. You could have different teachers. You could do like a kind of a conference and have a philosophy teacher, have an anatomy teacher. You do that kind of thing, A little bit tricky with the Mysore style classes, but the other style of classes is you can do it.
Yeah. And coming back to that point on the Mysore class, you're still teaching the traditional sequence in that class, right?
Yeah.
No, you're still up for that.
Yeah. I mean, the great thing about the Mysore style is that there's no talking, more or less, and people are doing their practice, and everybody's working at their own pace.
And
I really love it. And it has that kind of meditative feel. It's a special feeling.
Yeah. So you're leaving it pure. You're not adding extra movements. I mean, it seems to me that I was going to ask this earlier on, that when you started the extra training, and that my experience as well is that actually that was kind of necessary to have more accomplishment in the asana. And, another kind of myth of Mysore, right? It was like, don't do any training outside asana practice, right? Like it kind of shifted. In the early days, it was like David Swenson going twice a day to the Shala to be, hammered by Pattabhi Jois. And then latterly, like, well, you should only heat the body once a day. You should only practice once a day. Don't do any asana. Asana is enough. You don't need any other movements out. And then suddenly it's like you've been doing like a few jump throughs and you're called to like be able to lift yourself into a handstand, like, well, where did that come from, right? Like, where, where did I get enough strength to do that? Like my experience, and I think yours, is that those extra movements outside helped in the asana. Is that correct? And therefore, wouldn't you teach them along with your new Mysore style teaching?
Absolutely. But so what I do is I teach all that stuff in the afternoon workshops.
Right.
So then people start to integrate it into their practice, into their Mysore style practice. If they want to, not every...
so the sequence needs to be adjusted or is lacking that you might add in extra stuff.
Yeah, so like I have different workshops. I'll have a backbending kind of sequence, the way that I approach backbending. So that would be like one afternoon workshop. Also, all the arm balances, jump back, jump through. Just understanding the core essential patterns of that. And then last year was my big project was incorporating the functional range conditioning approach into the practice, and that was like really a big game changer for a lot of people, particularly all the joint mobility work. So just like really understanding how to isolate each joint of the body and being able to move each joint through an active range of motion, and then taking that approach back into the asana practice. So that's kind of the way that I feel in my own practice, and I'm leaning more towards that in the way that I teach also, is that instead of having like a fixed idea of downward dog, for example, that the scapula have to be depressed and protracted, instead, why not teach the person how to move the scapula in all directions?
Yeah.
And then they have options.
Yeah.
One day they might want to elevate them to the ears. One day then, and rotational movements also is, that's kind of like nature's way of anti-inflammatory. It's so good for the joints.
Hey, just to play devil's advocate, there's something in tradition. There's something in tradition, like I think ultimately knowledge is there to liberate the individual. There's no such knowledge out there. It's rather what it can do for you, right? Like to inspire an attitude in yourself, right? But on the other hand, having some certain knowledge out there, like, in the early days when we found the practice, it was great, wasn't it? It's like, this is how you do it. It's done, there's no two ways about it. And it kept me in it. It kept me, if someone had said, well, you could do like this, or you could move your shoulders like that, I don't think it would have held me. But this kind of very dogmatic idea of tradition, in inverted commas, isn't there something still in that for the early student, the early student who needs to be kind of, have that grounding, in their spiritual life.
Yeah. I mean, there's a balance, I suppose. One of the dilemmas or problems I've had recently was that some, people see my posts on Instagram or whatever and think, oh, okay, this guy's, really open. He's experimenting with all this stuff. So he must be really cool to go practice with him. So then they come to the practice, they come to my workshop or my Mysore class, and then they're just doing random things, but not in like a way that's like in flowing with the rest of the group. Like that dancer I was telling you about, like the way she does it, it's very like, it fits. Like no one even notices that she's doing her own thing. Whereas you get some people coming in and then just doing absolutely random things, and it just really is kind of disruptive energy because it's not focused. And then also it's a bit like that thing that like Mathew was saying, was like, then it's like, I feel like I can't even teach them because they've just got their own idea of what they want to do. They don't want to listen to anything. They don't even want to learn something. They don't even know why they've come, actually. So in that sense, what you're saying about, having that traditional, like this is the vinyasa, this is how many counts, this is the drishti. Yeah, for sure. It's great. And it definitely creates like a good framework. But
and also,
like Joey was saying in his podcast, he's like, but you don't want to get stuck there. It's like with the music thing, right? I like that analogy. It's like once you feel the music, then you don't need that anymore.
Yeah. as much as I'm very reluctant to be the teacher, and I think you found the same thing, that it's just, it's this huge stress and it creates expectations. Then you have to play a certain role, which, because of people's expectations, right? On the other hand, some sense of role playing, right? There's a teacher, there's authority, you have discipline, you have it inspires an open-mindedness. This idea, I suppose I'm circling around the question of, what does tradition or traditional yoga practice mean to you now, as opposed to what you're doing on the arm balances, which wouldn't be called traditional?
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm so curious about, even the tradition, that's like all this, that the Hatha Yoga project, that's why I just did that course on the Hatha Vyasapati. Yeah. Even like these, in the, I guess, Shivananda tradition, they have, or Bihar school, they have the Pawan Muktasana sequence, which is basically the joint mobility. You must have seen it. They go through each part of the body, moving the neck circles, shoulder circles, all this stuff. When I first started, I used to think, that's like pretty funny. Like you see people in the parks in India doing this kind of stuff. But actually, this is part of that would be part of traditional Hatha Yoga, I guess. But I don't know where it came from originally. Were they doing that for thousands of years? Or is this in the last century? How do we call it? What's tradition, And then if you look at the Hatha Vyasapati, that's like a very dynamic sequence, right? And in that, there's a lot of moving asana sequences, like stuff that looks like modern day vinyasa flow, or like even animal flow. There's like all these kind of movements, a bit like the, in the duns that the Hindu wrestlers do, this kind of thing. So it's like, I don't know, man, like what is tradition? Because we, as Ashtangas, we tend to think that we have the tradition, but does that mean that anyone who's not practicing Ashtanga is not traditional?
I think, isn't tradition devoting to something greater than yourself, in terms of, to give a very general answer to it, isn't the ability to step outside yourself and with an open mind that you don't know, isn't that something to do with tradition?
Okay, so in that sense, yeah, I'm very traditional.
Right. In which case, at that point, you need first of all, you need like a definite tradition to do that to devote to, otherwise it's too general, it's just too general, like devote to what, first of all, you have to have humility. But once you have that, then it's like you've learned that trick. Now maybe you can freestyle a bit.
Yeah. I think, that's the truth for everything, isn't it? Like first you learn all the rules, and then once you've learned them, you can break the rules. Same with music. Yeah.
And a more practical level, what would you recommend, or what did you do to build up the strength that you need to do the arm balances that you might not have got through just doing the asana?
The thing is that the arm balances, you do build up a lot of strength in the Ashtanga sequence, especially if you end up going into second, third series with all those arm balances. But there's no, I guess you just learn just by doing it, I guess. There were some teachers who gave me little tips here and there, but there was no...
You won't go back to the room doing like 1,000 practice.
No, it was not really until I think 2014 was the first time that I came across the idea of the hollow body position from gymnastics.
Right.
And then once I learned that, then it was like, okay, that changes a lot of things.
Yeah.
When you start like applying that principle to a lot of the practice.
But you were never taught that in Mysore?
No. Right.
Well, that's like, yeah, but it is. There's like keeping your scapula apart, protracting
ribs in, posterior pelvic tilt, all that kind of stuff.
It always it confuses me why that's not taught, in Mysore at all, say by Sharat or Guruji, when they were doing that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's but that's not, that technical stuff has never really been there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you listen to David Williams, he's really adamant that he was just taught just Mula Bandha, breath, and that was it. You just focus on your breathing and Mula Bandha, and that was the practice.
But you wouldn't agree with that because you're quite technical in the workshops and stuff, right? You know.
Yeah, I mean that's a different goal. You know, like if you want to go into just like a meditative state, yeah, that's fantastic. But if you're doing complex movements and, you know, potentially dangerous asanas, then I think you need some technique. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. You're going to have injuries for sure. And that, I mean, to be honest, I wanted to mention this. I think that was one of the things that early on, right, I noticed when I was looking at the older generation. I was just thinking that there was a lack of, I didn't see a lot of robustness and vitality in their physicality. You know, like I come from Australia, right? So the surfers like down at Bondi Beach in their 60s look more robust than some of the, you know, those older generation guys, you know. Okay, yeah, sure, they could still do some great postures, but you wouldn't want them to have to run down the street. And so that always is in the back of my mind, you know, in terms of like the asana practice, what's the long-term effect of doing such an intense practice, third series, fourth series. And I remember once in Mysore, I think it was in 2015, I was just walking around Gokulam and my knee kind of buckled on me as I was walking. And I was just like, oh, that's not good. So I was just like, okay, if I want to be able to maintain some vitality and robustness into my 50s, 60s, 70s, then I don't think that doing third and fourth series is going to be the way to do that. You know, I think for that, you need to start doing some other movements. You know, for me, lifting some weights, getting to the gym and doing some squats, stuff like that has been much more beneficial for my hips and stability, you know?
Yeah.
And now just getting out and walking, hiking, that kind of stuff.
I also felt, the knee stuff later on, it does raise some serious questions in the mind.
Yeah, man, for sure.
Yeah. What do you think, I mean, outside committing to an asana practice as a definition of you trying to do something in life which is different to just, you know, unreflective life, let's say. Well, you know, if you abandon that and say, well, you're doing your own thing now, you know, whatever that is, what is a yoga lifestyle to you? What are the principles that still frame your lifestyle? Are they the same or have they changed?
I think the yamas and niyamas being, you know...
You're still living by them or trying to live by them, right?
Yeah, and just trying to be meditative, contemplative, mindful, using the breath awareness throughout the day, trying to maintain that reflection, you know, when I'm walking, trying to maintain that, you know, presence. And then also the self-inquiry. I mean, I guess that's the main thing, isn't it? It's like, what are those patterns in me that stop me from being, you know, a good person?
So is that the aim?
Yeah, pretty much. I'd say.
So the aim is practical based, life based, to be a good person in life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. For me, that's the main thing is like, I know what my main issues are, like would be anger and control issues. And, you know, so I just have to watch those patterns, you know, and try my best to try to reduce the effect that they have on me and, you know, on my wife and my daughter. And I think that's been the big one, having a daughter. It's like suddenly realizing, okay, whatever patterns that we have, they're going to be played out in front of her. So what do we want to share? How do we want to bring her up? So I think, and that's the power of the yoga practice, right? Is that it gives you that ability to have that self-awareness and the ability to make those changes. Yeah. It's always, I mean, I can't remember, there's there's that book, Lance Armstrong, it's not about the bike. I think Jerry Lopez, the surfer, wrote something similar, like it was never about the wave, or it's not, and so it's the same when it comes to Ashtanga and asanas. Like, it was never about the asana, it was about the lessons learned from that practice.
I liked Joe Simpson's Touching the Void. I think, as you know, an absolutely pointless thing to do, that in its absolutely pointlessness was, seriously profound, right? That's like act for the sake of action.
That's the one where the Mount Everest, is it?
Yeah,
is that one?
I don't know whether it was Everest, but he climbed some big mountain anyway. I think it was K2, and he fell down a crevice. And he was kind of suspended on a rope in the dark, and he didn't know whether the other guy was slipping as well, or whether he was even attached to the other guy anymore. The other guy, I think, died actually. But someone will correct me on that later on. But, just a question to a lighter front, just to wrap this up. Have you got any tips? A while back, I know you knew Sayuri from Purple Valley, and were you vegan and raw, or what are you doing diet-wise these days? I don't know. I don't think, doesn't look like you're eating like blades of grass anymore. You look quite chunky.
Yeah. No, I am eating some meat now.
Oh yeah. Right. Well,
yeah.
Okay.
I'll probably lose a lot of followers now when people hear about that.
Or gain some. You can only please some of the people some of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, but I mean,
you felt that you need.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of reasons. One, there was just one health issue I was having, and I felt like that was something that I needed.
Right.
And then just in terms of, I mean, this is a whole nother big story in terms of like evolutionary biology, like looking into that, like how did we evolve as humans? I mean, I'm sure some people would debate what I'm saying, but, it seems to me that the reason why our brains developed was the fact that we were hunting. And that's how the Homo species evolved. So I'm not sure that the vegan diet is for everybody.
But you were at one point pursuing like...
I get it from the ethical point of view. I understand for sure. But from a health point of view, I'm not so certain.
Mm-hmm. And you're okay.
You're vegan, right?
No, I'm not anymore. No. I was. Were you a vegan?
I was.
Yeah. To be quite honest, I eat a bit of fish now and again, but I'm not eating the meat. My feeling is that if I can kill it, then I'll eat it. But I'm not sure I could I'm not sure I could kill a cow. So that just seems to me dishonest. And, I'm kind of just about honesty, really,
Yeah. I get it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Now you're going to lose some followers too.
Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah. I mean, I could kill a small fish. If people are going to judge me for that, then, so be it, right?
Yeah.
Kill a sardine, then I'll unfollow you. And just still trying to end on a light note.
Yes.
I struggle with that. What do you do for fun? What's your inspiration? Like, give me a quick off the cuff answer. What do you do for fun? What inspires you? And kind of favorite place? Yeah.
Okay, so you've changed the guilty pleasure question.
Yeah, right. Well, no one had a guilty pleasure, right? Like, everyone was kind of trying to step around that.
I thought about what I was going to say.
You have it. What is it then?
I was going to say my guilty pleasures. I actually enjoy watching like chick flicks on Netflix, like Gossip Girl, Friends, this kind of stuff. So now the recent one, Emily in Paris.
Oh, that's great. That's really good, isn't it? I have to say, I'm not guilty at all. I think it's a great show.
It was excellent.
We're in France right now, so it has
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, for fun, the most fun I have probably is surfing.
Right.
And then, what was the other one?
Kind of like an inspiration. Like, who do you look to for a teacher right now? Who inspires you as a teacher who you would really look up to and love to study with?
I think I like I mean, for me, the people that inspire me are people who have found their true passion, their calling in life, and are living that. So I love listening to people who, in any subject, if they're really passionate about it. But personally, right now, I'm enjoying reading books on or listening to people talking about, neuroscience and this kind of mixing of like the latest in science with what's going on with yoga, trying to find that connection between, the ancient traditions and modern Western science. And just I'm interested in all things movement, pretty much.
Right. So at one point you would have said, like I would have said, you had one teacher, right? And now you feel like you're getting from different places. You don't have that feeling of looking to one person.
Yeah, not so much. No. Mm-hmm. I mean, I still have. Yeah, actually, I was going to say I still have my mentors and so on, but not so much now. I mean, of course, they're there. They've played a huge role in who I am. But at the moment, I don't have that one teacher that I'm looking towards or to find anything.
Yeah. All right. Well, we could go on, but I'm going to leave it there today.
Yeah. It'd be nice to go.
Thank you very much for coming on. All right.
Thanks, Adam.
Great to have you.